Hello everyone, Chiori is releasing very soon with the 4.5 patch arriving in about a week, so I wanted to quickly cover the last beta changes that were made to her abilities and what her finalized kit means for her place in the Genshin meta, both in terms of overall strength and pull value. By the time this video is out, the 4.5 Genshin livestream should have already been released with all the official Chiori explanations, and while I'm making this video before the livestream, we already pretty much knew what she did beforehand, so my analysis here will still be up to date. With that, let's get into the Chiori discussion. In terms of her final beta updates, first there were some text changes confirming where exactly Chiori's dolls spawned. Her C2, previously C4, initially confused me because it said that the simple dolls spawned near Chiori after using her ult, implying that you needed Chiori to stay on field, which didn't really make sense with her kit until C6. Now it explicitly says active character, which makes sense with her kit. And they have also clarified that all normal dolls spawn near the active character now as well, including the extra doll when there is a construct present. Second, they increased Chiori's detection range of nearby constructs. I find this pretty funny because this shows that there was a world where you could just have a construct on the field, but if you ran too far away from it and used Chiori's skill, you literally wouldn't even get 2 dolls. So now that they increased the range to 30 meters, which is larger than the Abyss Arena, practically there should be no way that you miss out on a second doll with a construct now. And that's it. That's pretty much all that was changed with Chiori in her final beta update. And to be perfectly honest, I think that's fine. With the previous beta update nerfing her ult damage for some reason that I still don't really understand, I was pessimistically expecting Hoyo to randomly nerf her for no valid reason again. So I'm glad that that's not the case and she still has her strengths as an all-field Geo sub DPS. As the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Chiori's kit is in truth very simple, as she's pretty much a character that only places a turret and switches out to deal damage, and while many people may not like that basic playstyle, to evaluate her overall strength and value as a character, I won't consider these more subjective opinions on Chiori, but focus on 2 important things: what her kit brings to the table in terms of team building, and how good she is at her intended role when compared to other options. Focusing on just those 2 questions will be more than enough to determine how good of a character Chiori is when compared to the other limited 5 stars you could possibly pull. Chiori's main role is an off-field Geo sub DPS that just provides damage, no buffs. Yes, there are some on-field shenanigans that you can do with her, especially at C6, but I will focus on her intended role for this meta-analysis. Because of her synergy with Geo constructs and the mono-element design of Geo itself, her main strength will be in Geo teams, but she can be technically played in any team that has an empty slot open as just an off-field DPS. She fulfills a Geo flex slot in both Geo and non-Geo teams, so which characters compete with this particular slot? Well, her closest comparisons are pretty much just Albedo and Zhongli, as they are the only 2 other main Geo flex units. So how does Chiori perform versus these 2 characters? First, Chiori versus Albedo. These 2 units pretty much do the exact same thing and serve the same purpose on a team: off-field Geo sub DPS. And in my honest opinion, Chiori is just strictly a better Albedo. Damage-wise, even at 1 doll, pre-release calculations show that Chiori still does more damage overall, and damage is the most important factor to consider since all these 2 characters do is just deal damage from off-field. Yes, Albedo has an EM buff on his ult, but realistically it isn't that useful because number 1, you're disincentivized to use Albedo's ult because it doesn't even scale off defense, so you could probably be doing something else on another character on your team that will increase your team's damage. Number 2, most teams that Albedo is in are Geo, so EM is pretty useless. And 3, even in non-Geo teams where the EM buff is useful and Albedo has a potential team slot like the old Hu Tao double Geo team, the EM buff doesn't really make up for Albedo's other weaknesses in his kit. And his main weakness is that his skill is a construct. Because they can easily break, you can sometimes not place it correctly, or enemies can just walk or get knocked away from its damage range. Your damage and your energy generation will be very inconsistent. Since Chiori's dolls are just turrets, however, you can just get consistent damage and energy from her. And that aspect is why I consider Chiori as Albedo 2.0 across the board. Now, in terms of Chiori's versus Albedo's damage, I've seen the counter argument that Albedo's skill damage has better AoE. My TLDR response to this is pretty much number 1, Albedo's AoE is still relatively small and inconsistent, and 2, Abyss floor 12 is primarily single target focused even when there are multiple mobs, so personally I put more importance on having better single target damage, which Chiori has. Next, let's move on to Chiori versus Zhongli. Even though their main roles in the team are different, I think it's still a good comparison to make since they compete for the same Geo flex slot in teams. Obviously, Chiori is a sub DPS and Zhongli is a shielder and buffer. From the calcs I've seen, Chiori brings a little bit more DPS to a team overall. For instance, in the Navia teams like the one I'm playing in the background, replacing Chiori with Zhongli will be more damage even with the absence of a construct. However, the difference isn't too insane, and of course Zhongli brings comfort with his shield, which can be a pretty big deal in practice. But the one thing that Chiori does have over Zhongli that I want to emphasize again is consistent Geo particle generation. It is very difficult to place Zhongli's pillar in a way to get consistent energy generation, to the point where a lot of energy calculations have Zhongli producing little to no particles for a team. But remember, Chiori's dolls aren't constructs, allowing for consistent energy generation for a team. That may lower ER requirements so that you can allocate more stats into damage. But ultimately, the Chiori versus Zhongli choice is pretty much, do you want a little bit more damage and consistent energy generation, or do you want a comfortable shield when you play? That's pretty much it. Lastly, let's take a step back to analyze and summarize her strength in her overall teams that you can play her in. In terms of Geo Teams, Chiori is at her strongest. Geo Team's weakest teammates are Albedo and Zhongli, so being able to replace either of them, especially Albedo directly, is already a big boost. This boost is even larger if your team is able to generate 2 Geo constructs such as Ito and Ningguang team, so you can spawn Chiori's second doll to maximize her damage. But even at 1 doll, she is a perfectly fine unit in that slot and will perform well, such as in Navia and Noelle teams. Sure, you don't get that second doll, but having 1 doll is still a slight upgrade to team damage, and more importantly, gives you that consistent Geo particle generation, something that a lot of Geo teams will be very happy with. In terms of non-Geo teams, while she can slot in as a Geo sub TPS just dealing damage and will definitely be a decent unit doing her own thing in this role, even with the 1 doll DPS, I don't think it'll ever be optimal when the other flex units can deal similar off-field damage and provide an element or a buff that just benefits the team more. Once you get outside of the realm of Geo, for instance when you consider other options such as Yelan, Xingqiu, and Fisho, she unfortunately loses out in the flex party slot mainly due to element. Geo is designed to not really synergize that well with other elements, so when those other options can deal damage and provide an element that provides a team with valuable reactions, Chiori unfortunately loses out on her overall utility as a general off-field sub DPS. And that leads into my final evaluation on Chiori's place in the meta and her overall pull value. Of course, if you like the character, you should definitely pull. That's always been my philosophy. And if you decide to pull, Chiori will perform just fine in the teams that you decide to play her in. If I ignore that aspect, in my opinion, she has an average to below average pull value. She is Albedo 2.0, but unfortunately, Albedo wasn't a very good unit to begin with and had very little good team options. In non-Geo teams, Chiori will be decent, but won't be optimal because other elemental sub DPSs will just be more beneficial to the team. So realistically, her best teams will mostly be restricted to mono-Geo centric teams. And in those teams, she is a strong option. Geo's main problem is not having a lot of character options, so having one that deals solid damage and provides consistent energy is good for them. And she will especially shine in teams that can make 2 Geo constructs for that extra doll. So if you play Geo teams that can activate Chiori's second doll like Ito, I think she is a pretty valuable pull. Now, will Chiori make Geo teams the most OP teams that you could possibly play, just as good as all the other meta teams? Well, not really. Geo has been in a tough spot for a while. Chiori does buff those teams, but Geo teams do definitely need more units, more characters, more options in order for them to really match up to some of the top teams in the Genshin meta. However, just releasing another Geo character like Chiori is a step in the right direction for Geo if we want to elevate Geo teams closer to the other teams that we could possibly play. In terms of 1 doll teams, and the main one that comes to mind are Navia teams, although I mentioned that she is an overall upgrade to Zhongli in terms of damage, in my honest opinion, the difference is not big enough to justify pulling Chiori just for these teams. My Navia Zhongli teams work just fine, they deal a lot of damage, and I can turn my brain off with the shield. Because of this, I personally don't see a point pulling for Chiori to improve this team just slightly. If you want to pull Chiori to play the Navia Chiori pairing, then go ham. It will be very solid. But personally, I don't think it's worth my Primo Gems, especially when a certain father is coming out very soon. So that is my final analysis on Chiori. She's an okay unit, but I would really only recommend her if you play certain Geo teams at the moment, or if you really wanted to invest in the Geo stocks now so that you're prepared to whenever they release more Geo units that work well with Chiori in the future. Feel free to leave any questions you have or your thoughts in the comment section, and leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this evaluation video and are interested in similar analysis videos like this in the future. For all of you who are planning to pull Chiori, I wish you the best of luck and I hope all of you have a wonderful day.